Becky, thanks for joining us today. I wanted to start out by asking you what brought you into and what attracted you to the First Church of Salt Lake City?
Well, I was introduced to the Unitarian Church by my in-laws, Martin and Muriel Zwick. I was married to their son, Patrick. And Martin had been the principal clarinetist in the Utah Symphony for many years, and Muriel had been quite an organizer and quite a woman of great influence in the arts community, and she'd also been the director of Friendship Manor, something that our church has been involved with since the beginning. So the two of them were people with a great deal of esteem and a great deal of involvement in the church. So they introduced me to the church, and Dylan, Patrick and my son, their grandson, was blessed by Dick Henry, in 1980. And that was my first actual experience of being in the sanctuary, was when my son was blessed by Dick Henry. And it took me a few years to decide to go back. And some part of that was I just needed more than what I had in my life. I needed more than my job. I needed more than my family. I needed some more connection to a higher purpose and more of a community. So I started taking Dylan to the preschool, and I started attending church. And I would sit on the back row in Elliott Hall and leave as soon as it was over, because I didn't want anybody to see me there, because I knew if they did, I would start being asked to do things, and I wasn't ready for that yet. So I did that for about a year, and then I just said to myself, this is where you belong. You might as well start being a part of things. So I presented myself and said, I want to start doing stuff. So the first thing I did was I was involved with the very first church auction. A guy named Joel Morris, who had been a friend of mine in high school, was helping do this, he and his wife Laurel. And they said, why don't you help out? And it was, I'd done fundraising for years and years, and so I got a bunch of stuff for that first auction, and it was in Elliott Hall, and there were a bunch of hay bales around, and we had a potato bar. And there was maybe 50 people there. We raised a few $1,000s. And I helped out with that for a few years, and then, of course, the auction got bumped up, and now it's an amazing affair. Now it's so much more than it was when it began, but that's the way I got introduced to the church, to doing more with the church. And then I taught RE for years and years and years. And then they asked me to do a children's choir. So I did. And I put together a children's choir, and that choir lasted for about 7 years. And during that time, we made a CD called Love is a Circle, and we went back to Nashville for the 2000 GA and sang in this huge children's choir that Nick Page put together. And so there were there's probably 11 or 12 kids between 8 and 9, 10 that sang in this choir. And of course it was GA, so it was huge. It was this, I'm sorry.
What is GA?
GA is General Assembly. It is like when all the Unitarians get together. So GA is General Assembly, and they hold it every year in a different city. And it's like a huge convention. And that year it was in Nashville. So we all went to Nashville to General Assembly. And there's all these children, this huge bank of children singing these amazing songs. Nick Pages, who's this amazing musician, was leading them, and the cameras were sweeping along and catching these lovely little faces and projecting them on these big screens where we could all see them, and the camera's banking along and picks up this cute little redhead, this kid named Becky Heal, my son, who sees the camera and goes, and broke up the entire congregation. I mean, honestly, people were laughing throughout the entire hall, and they jerked the camera away as fast as they could from him. And the whole time there, he was the redhead kid. And everywhere we went, people would go, "You're that redhead kid, aren't you?" So it was a wonderful experience for our kids and a hilarious experience for Baxter.
What some viewers may not know is that you have a long and illustrious background in music. Perhaps you could share
a little bit, maybe 20, 30 seconds with us about the Saliva Sisters.
Oh gosh, well, my experience on stage and singing started when I was 8, and my sister and I won the Ted Mack Original Amateur Hour back before most people seeing this were born, and it was just downhill ever since then. So I sang with my real sister for years and years and years, and then I went on the road and sang with a band. I sang with 5 or 6 different bands in Salt Lake City before being a Saliva Sister, so I had done a lot of singing before that. And then I got together with these 2 amazing women, and we put together the Saliva Sisters in about 1980. And we are still singing now, 2018. In fact, we have a gig this Saturday.
Becky, you have had music as a core central piece of your life since you were 8 years old. Knowing that, tell me about your involvement with the choir at First Unitarian Church.
Well, the choir has just grown so remarkably, just like the whole congregation. But when David Owens took it over, he started to build, and it is a remarkable institution. It is almost an obsession, if not a passion, for some members of that choir, myself included. I mean, we do choir all week long. We have an email group that we converse with. Most of my very best friends that I hang with are all in the choir. I mean, there is such camaraderie and such sense of purpose and pleasure with that group, and it's based entirely on David Owens and his great skill and his great talent, and now Dr. Zabriskie, David Zabriskie. So what David has done, Dr. David Zabriskie, because the choir had just gotten too big for its place in the church. There was no place to put everybody. So he peeled off 16 groups we had to audition for. You don't have to audition to be in the choir, but we had to audition for this group. And he peeled off 16 and called us the chancel singers. Right. It's the chancel choir and the chalice singers. So we're the chalice singers. And we get together on Tuesday nights, and we just love it. We love it. We're singing inspiring music. We're singing well together. We've got this remarkable leader in Dr. Zabriskie, and we've had 2 performances so far for the church. And the feedback has been wonderful. But our experience of it has been just phenomenal. In terms of musical experiences for me, there's been nothing like this. It's really good.
Tell me about the relevance of the choir and music in general to the Unitarian experience. How do the two mesh and blend? And do you think that that is part of the appeal of this particular church?
Oh, I have no question. It's part of the appeal of this church. There are a number of people I know that are active members of the church who came into the church through the choir. But it's not just that. It's just the fact that there's such an elevated sense of experience in our entire service. There's the remarkable sermons that Tom gives. There's the remarkable music that David Owens brings. But over the years, we've had some phenomenal players. There was Stephen Emerson so long ago, who was a symphony player, a symphony cellist, who was like the musical director for a while and played and played and played. We've had Mary Craig here, who's one of the finest sopranos I've ever heard, who was a member of our congregation, sang beautifully for us for years and years. There was Martin Zwick, my late no, he's not my stepdad. He's my dad-in-law, my father-in-law, who was a marvelous clarinet player, a marvelous mandolin player who played many times for our congregation. Patrick Zwick, his son, my ex-husband, who was a symphony player, who's played the mandolin there, who's played the guitar there. I mean, there has just been, I'm sure I'm leaving some out, Carl Johansson, who played so beautifully last Saturday, a member of the Utah Symphony, a viola player who's played for us many times. So the level of musicianship that is expected in our services is as high as it gets. You know, and it all lends itself so well to that sense of we're experiencing something excellent. It's something about humanity at its best that we get to experience every Sunday.
And if you were speaking to a viewer, say, in the 2020s or even the 2030s, would you tell them that they need to be in church for the music in particular?
I would assume so. Our lovely Tom Goldsmith, said he wants music to be primary. He wants the church to be known for the music that's there. And he's setting things in motion to do that. Dr. David Zabriskie's is notable in that. So I believe that tradition and that aspiration will continue whether or not Tom's there or not.
Several years ago, the choir was invited to sing at Carnegie Hall in New York City. Mm-hmm. Tell us about that.
Well, it was 2010, and we sing requiems every year. And the Bradley Ellingbow Requiem is one that we had sung a year or two before, and this composer got the word out to people who'd purchased his music that they were going to be doing his Requiem in Carnegie Hall. So come on and come. So we said, oh yeah, we still want to do this, but we had to raise money to do it. So the choir just did everything we could imagine to raise money to get us all there, and we did. And without, I think there were one or two who couldn't make it, but pretty much all of us ended up going to Carnegie Hall and singing with the biggest choir ever I can imagine. I mean, it got hilarious after a while, because row after row after row of human beings would go on there. I mean, there must have been 10,000 people in the choir there. And it was just the most amazing experience. For one thing, we had Bradley Ellingbow, who's this amazing musician and composer and director and singer, and we were in his hands, or like putty in his hands. I mean, it was just a remarkable experience for all of us.
Any other anecdotes that come to mind from your time up to this point and perhaps beyond with the choir, with the church? Any events that stick in your mind as being remarkable and contributing to your sense of engagement with the church?
Well, for me, my engagement with the church was around my children. I raised 2 boys in the church, both of whom got so much out of their membership and so much out of their experience. My oldest boy is still really active. My young boy will be, again, I'm sure. So there was the fact that I had this community help me raise my boys. There was the remarkable musical experiences I got. I mean, I've been able to solo with the choir 5 or 6 times, and there's just been, they've been magical experiences for me. I was the chair of the Social Justice Committee when we had the 2009 General Assembly here in Salt Lake City. And we were allowed to make decisions about which charity in Utah would get the proceeds from when they passed the plate during the Sunday service. And we knew it would be quite a lot of money. So we got to sit and decide who would get that. And we decided on the Utah Pride Center. So that was one of the high points for me, is that the woman, Valerie Larrabee, who was the head of Utah chair at Utah Pride Center, and I got to walk into GA with those great big banners at the very first, and we raised $30,000 for Pride Center that Sunday, and then we had an Anybody Can Come prom that I helped put together. So that was a huge high for me. It was the social justice work that I was able to do with the church, and I got to say, Dr. David Zabriskie's Requiem, singing that Requiem in 2011, and again a few years ago, he wrote it especially for us. And I even talked to people who heard that Requiem and thought that that was one of the high points of their experience with the church, and we got to sing it. And it was, I don't know, but you don't get a whole lot better than that. Singing that kind of beautiful music with people you love and people who love you in a setting that's totally your home. It was probably singing that Requiem that was the high part so far.
If you were to look ahead to the future, what would you tell folks in the 20s and the 30s of this century what they could gain from joining the First Church?
If you want a community that will nurture you and support you, that will give you back everything you give them and double it, you should be with this community. Not only will it allow you to be a good citizen of the world and give you the tools and the experience to do that, you can rest in their love and their support. I mean, the members of this church really love and support each other. So that's what you can get if you're willing to give. If you're willing to take the deep dive, you'll get it back. You'll get it back hundredfold.
Rebecca, during our chat, I asked you if there were any special events or anecdotes or stories that come to mind that have relevance to the church, not only today, but going forward into the future. Give me one.
Thank you for allowing me to tell you probably one of the most important, and that is Friendship Manor. Friendship Manor was started by Hugh Gilligan, who was the minister of the church in 1967. And he invited 4 other congregations to join, and these 5 congregations put together this high-rise place for senior living, and a portion of it was set aside for handicapped. So there's this place for seniors to live, and there's like a 10% of the condos or of the apartments are set aside for the handicapped people. And since 1967, in the 50 years they've been doing this, hundreds, if not thousands, of people have found a place to live out the rest of their lives that has been supportive and communal. Their families have had a place to put their loved ones where they knew they'd be taken care of. I mean, of all the gifts that our congregation has given to the community at large, that's probably the greatest, because it's been there for 113 people annually. That's how many condos or apartments that are there. And at our 50th anniversary celebration last year, we had people who had been there, who'd come back, whose parents had been there, who just gave these glowing testimonials about how much that place had meant to them. It means a lot to me personally. My sister, my differently abled sister, has lived there for 10 years, and it has been the best thing that's happened for her. She's found love, she's found companionship, she's just blossomed there. And she's not alone. And our church started it in 1967.
Becky, thanks for joining us today. I wanted to start out by asking you what brought you into and what attracted you to the First Church of Salt Lake City? Becky, you have had music as a core central piece of your life since you were 8 years old. Knowing that, tell me about your involvement with the choir at First Unitarian Church. Becky, did you have any previous religious affiliation before you came to the Unitarian Church?
I was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and so was my family. Going back several generations, my forebears came across the ocean and were some of the very early pioneers in Salt Lake City. So I have a very rich cultural heritage for the LDS Church.
And at what point did you feel that you wanted to break away from the church, the LDS Church?
It was especially difficult. The whole idea that African Americans were inferior and that they had made mistakes before they were born and therefore weren't worthy enough to have the priesthood, that was really, really hard for me. And I think that was the beginning of me deciding that I really had to look more closely at this religion. I was traveling a lot. I was singing in nightclubs all over the country and just seeing a lot of people, and I decided that life was richer and more interesting than what I imagined my life would be as an LDS person. So it was difficulties with what was their doctrine then. It's changed then. And what I perceived would be my life experience if I stayed in that church. So I I stopped going in my early 20s. Okay, well, Sylvia was doing a sermon on Lilith, and it had a lot to do with women's sexuality. And she asked me to sing the Pointer Sisters' "I'm So Excited," which is all about women's sexuality. And I was still kind of new to the church, and I was waiting. As you can go into the sanctuary on the right side, you go through the door up to the pulpit, and I'm waiting right there on that door to go outside and sing out into the sanctuary and sing that song. And I said, I just can't do this. I cannot walk into a church service and sing this song. It doesn't belong in church. Then this voice said, you're a Unitarian now. Anything goes. I said, okay. So I walked out and I sang the song. And sure enough, pretty much anything goes.
Could you sing it for us now?
And if you go and if you move real slow, I'll let it go. I'm so excited, I just can't hide it. I know, I want you. It goes on from there. I'm about to lose control and I think I like it. Sang that in church.
Becky, you've held many different positions at First Church in Salt Lake City. Here we are looking at each other in 2018 and wondering about the future of the Unitarian Church in general and the one right here in Salt Lake City as well. You mentioned in a previous discussion that there's quite a bit of interest in how this church can evolve as the years go by and how it can sustain itself and maintain membership. Talk to me about that.
Well, we have discussed this a lot on the board, and Tom has been really concerned about it. There is a generalized decrease in interest and participation in religions generally throughout the entire world. I mean, there are very few religions, especially here in the United States, that are increasing. They're all decreasing, including Unitarianism. Our particular church has stayed fairly steady. We haven't had huge surges in membership. We haven't had huge declines. We've been pretty steady, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that Tom's been here so long and David's been here for so long. But my belief is that if any religions have a chance of being relevant into the future, it will be progressive liberal religion, because the issues that we talk about and care about won't ever go away unless humanity becomes perfect. You know, we'll always be concerned about social justice. We'll always be concerned about taking care of each other. You know, we'll always be concerned about our environment. I doubt that's ever going to change. And so I think the other religions that are focused basically on more supernatural things and more moral codes that get less and less relevant and less followed by a lot of people. You know, we only have moral codes that say be good to each other, and be good to yourself, and be good to each other, and be good to the world. And I think that's a relevant message forever. So my particular belief is that unless our particular church doesn't go through this transition into a new minister well, that we will do very well in the future. But it's the big question of whether or not we're going to lock arms and go through this transition of ministers together. And with what the board's doing, with a lot of the leadership in the church, we have every reason to believe that that's exactly what we'll do.